Here we go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of the Capitalist Corner. I am your host, Mark Pellegrino, the chairman of the American Capitalist Party, along with my esteemed and amazing co-host, Michael Liebowitz, who is the co-chairman of the American Capitalist Party and the host of his own show, The Rational Egoist. Wait a minute, you look like you wanted to say something.
No, I'm just with the virtual background. The shirt I'm wearing, it kind of blends, so it keeps disappearing. Looking like I'm
Oh,
losing my arms.
I thought this was a new magic trick that you were giving us to spice up the show somewhat.
I'm also on about 4 hours sleep, so if I'm a little loopy, please forgive me.
That's the title of my biography, my friend, A Little Loopy. So we have a lot of interesting news. Actually, I said I was going to start with the Bissent stuff, the Secretary of the Treasury, but I sort of wanted to start it off with something else. This other article you sent me about the nationwide protests that happened all over the country a couple of days ago. They happened in New York, they happened in Los Angeles, they were everywhere. Apparently, 1,200 cities were inundated with people who were protesting the Trump and Elon Musk DOGE cuts. Now, this sort of harkens back to me to Walter Williams' book, America's Contempt for the Constitution, and reminds me of so many manifestations that I see in Montreal and in Paris, all over Europe. People complaining about the fact that they're not getting what they want from the government, which is to be able to suck at the tit of government for an eternity, or eat at the trough of government, which means, our resources, not the government. The government isn't some disembodied institution that somehow creates wealth. No, it's our wealth that it takes and then redistributes to these people. And now, en masse, these people are coming out by the thousands to protest what they think are their rights to stuff. Now, what do you think about this?
Well, the reason I sent you the article because I thought, oh, I just dropped my little thing that I hold on to here. It's so illustrative of the lack of principle on all sides in the country, right? Because it's not as if the Doge cuts are this principled approach where they're actually trying to reestablish individual rights, right? Somebody's asking, where's the video feed? I don't know how he's asking if he's not on, but okay, I don't know. But anyway, they're not actually trying to reestablish individual rights. It's like a very haphazard, capricious approach. But then the people that are protesting that, they're not calling for anything principled either. They see, they don't want them touching their Medicare or their Medicaid, or don't touch Social Security. It's all about what they want, and it seems like that's just what it on all sides. That's what it is. It's just everybody's whims, and it's a race to have their whims implemented. And the United States Constitution isn't taken into consideration, and neither are any rational principles.
And why should they be? We live in a spoil system democracy now. And what a spoil system democracy is that the party in power gets the spoils. And that means they get to divide up the largesse of the government of the American people amongst themselves. Their interest rate, their interest group, their gangs are the ones that get to decide who gets what. And so all of these groups out there are essentially interest groups that are fighting for their piece of the finite pie that's stolen from the rest of us. And it shows a great deal of contempt, as you suggest, for constitutional limits of government, the idea of what a representative republic is, capitalism, the concept of private property, and the rights for people to say no. You should be able to not fund what these people are claiming you have an obligation to fund. So I found that these mass demonstrations show a phenomenal lack of principle, and I agree with you. Doge is about government efficiency, which is an oxymoron they'll never be able to solve. It is not about actually reducing inflation and reducing the size of government and cutting spending to the degree that takes this massive $37 trillion debt obligation off the backs of the American people and off the backs of multiple generations, it will essentially do very little to change any of that. And judging from the bills that are coming down out of the Senate, there's no intention at all to stop the fiscal irresponsibility that's going on in Washington.
No, there's a couple interesting things that have just come to my mind, and one has to do with the Doge boys or girls, if they have any. I haven't seen any Doge girls that are working on this, but maybe there are. I don't know. But either way, I've seen some reports that some are kind of upset with the tariffs now, and they want to push for AI and things of that nature, and this is going to cut into their bottom line, these tariffs, and I say. Right there. You want to get in bed with an unprincipled jerk? That's what ends up happening. What do you think? You're going to restrain him? Like I see post on X. Oh, this is not what I voted for. My ass, it's not what you voted for. Right? What do you think? You vote and then he's going to do whatever the hell, whatever you want him to do? No. This guy's been tariff man for over 40 years now. The other thing, Mark, when you mentioned interest rates, when you were talking about, I think, interest groups, but you said interest rates. And I read something this morning, and this is kind of an aside, but it's definitely relevant, that with the tariffs, it's being predicted that the Fed is going to slash interest rates and that will offset the rise in prices. Well, no, wait a second. What am I saying? No. If they slash interest rates, what's going to happen is you're going to pump money into the economy. When that happens, you're going to fuel inflation. So it's just one government intervention that then leads to another government intervention, and it happens over and over again. So the audience, so we can move on, just keep your eyes on the Federal Reserve and what it does to try to rescue us from these terrible tariffs by giving everybody money that's then just going to raise prices even more.
Well, let's be clear about that. It was Trump who wanted Powell to lower interest rates. Powell has refused so far because he understands that that's going to be incredibly inflationary and it's going to tank the economy. But Trump's response was something like, his usual bullying response is primitive, Powell's got to do the right thing, get on the right page, which is stoke the economy to hide the terrible effects of the tariffs. I mean, this is just a bait and switch. This is just a game of, hide the marble under the cup. That's all Trump is doing right now. And his refusal to back down, or at least his open refusal to back down, with respect to zeroing out tariffs with other countries. He's even tariffing countries that we have a quote unquote economic surplus with, which shows the BS behind his reciprocal tariff concept, which in theory was supposed to be, we'll do what you do, so we'll tariff you to the degree that you tariff us, with the idea of bringing trade tariffs down to zero. That's not his idea at all. He's a dominance and submission man. He doesn't understand that economics superiority and dominance come from more freedom. He thinks it comes from wielding a huge stick and beating the crap out of people until they submit to what you want.
Yeah, he is. And this reciprocal tariffs, and it turns out that their formula has to do with the deficits, trade deficits we have. All of a sudden, people seem to think, or maybe it's not all of a sudden, I don't know, that a trade deficit is a prima facie showing that we're being screwed somehow. It's not just that we want to buy more things from them, and not really we. We say we as kind of a shorthand, but it's not really we, right? It's individuals who happen to be Americans want to buy products from people in other countries. America as a whole is not buying, widgets or whatever. The individual United States citizen is choosing to buy things. And the individuals may be choosing to buy more from people in other countries than those people want to buy from here, and you have a deficit. It doesn't mean you're being ripped off, but Simpleton Don, because that's the way he looks. You're either screwing people over or they're screwing you over, and that's it. I mean, he's like, I'm going to keep referencing Cobra Kai because I'm watching it every night. I'm binge watching it. But the sensei, the Kreese, the bad sensei, That's how he views the world. No mercy. The world is trying to get you. You've got to get it first. And it's like Trump took lessons in his dojo, except for Trump can't fight.
Yeah, the language that the government uses it also tends towards this, right? When they use words like deficit, as if we're in a zero-sum game and the exchange is a loss and there's actually no gain because money is going out. That's a mercantilist perspective. When money goes out, then we become poor, even though we're receiving goods and services that make us richer. So the concepts like deficits, we have to start changing the language so that people understand that trade is a win-win, is always a win-win situation. And
Win-win, yes.
and restraining trade makes it a zero-sum game, which is what we're doing now. So Trump is ultimately going to make us poor, as if the disappearance of $6.4 trillion in the stock market overnight isn't evidence of that. Now the conservatives are walking back and saying, well, the stock market, it crashes, it does these things all the time, it makes these corrections all the time, it's going to correct in the other direction soon. Not if the tariff situation doesn't change. It's not. I think Trump, as I've said before, is sort of banking on what Reagan banked on during the Cold War. I think Reagan banked on the fact that we had a more prosperous economy than the Soviet Union, and we would outspend them and to bankruptcy, which is essentially what happened. But we weren't $37 trillion in debt. We didn't have $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities lurking underneath the surface of our economy right now. We didn't have fiat currency to the extent that we have it today. And so we live in an entirely different world. So if he thinks that he's going to somehow weather this storm through China and make them collapse economically before us, I mean, it's possible, but he's gambling with the lives of 300 million Americans to make that bet. And that's not a bet that is winning for anyone, because
it's also a very uncertain environment too, because you don't know what this fool's going to do from one day to the next. So how do you plan for anything? I mean, we're conceptual beings who have to plan our lives over the course of 10, 20, 30, 40 years. You don't know what this guy is going to do between now and 6.
Right. And this should be ample evidence to anybody who thinks that the government can plan anything, that, look, the government has a very limited vision. Its vision extends to the next election cycle, and that's it. I mean, Trump's doesn't even go that far. It extends to the next minute. And that's terrible. But the businessman has to extend their vision for years, for decades, in fact, which is one of the great things Rand pointed out. So their interests are always in the long term, and that's why they tend to be rational, because they are always in the long term. And one of the things that Trump is doing that's so terrible to the economy, aside from the actual mechanical stuff, is creating an environment of utter uncertainty. So no one knows what's going to happen, and no one can react. No one can start businesses. No one knows how much to offload. No one knows how much to purchase, because nobody knows what the prices are going to be from one minute to the next based on this insane, chaotic personality that we have in the White House right now.
Yes, never mind the insane, chaotic, unpredictable personality that you have as a co-host, because you were going to get into something and I woefully sidetracked us. I don't know. I don't either. You were going somewhere and I said, hold on. Something came to my mind about interest rates. Hey, and then we just went off from there.
There you go. Once I'm derailed permanently, my friend. I might have segued into the idea of the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent now declaring, and I'll quote this from this Axios article: "Access to cheap goods is not the essence of the American dream." Well, thank you for saying that, man. I love how these politicians in the political class, who are immune to every single disease they infect us with, are somehow also the definers of our dreams for us. Now, Michael, this just smells on its face. It certainly might not be entirely the American dream that products and goods are accessible to us, but it's certainly an aspect of the American dream. You want to, let's talk about what the American dream means for wealth,
Well,
because
you know, the great thing about not belonging to any of these political tribes is we're free to criticize all of them. So we don't ever have to get called on hypocrisy like this, right? When inflation was surging under Biden, was Besant out there saying, hey, affordable goods is not the essence of the American dream? Was that the Trump message as he was running for office? Hey, listen, we don't need affordable stuff. Now, the American dream ultimately is about being free and being prosperous. But how can you be free and prosperous when the government is initiating force against you, stealing your money, when it's driving up the cost of goods, so even the money that you're allowed to keep doesn't go as far as it normally does? I mean, it may not be the essence. Like if you were to encapsulate the American dream, you wouldn't say cheap goods and services, but certainly affordable products that will help to sustain a free lifestyle is part of the American dream. And it's just what it is it's just a I don't want to use that word. It's just a scummy little ploy on this guy's part to escape the consequences of the policies that they're putting in. If they, not escape the consequences, escape the electoral consequences of the policies that they're putting in, which ultimately they cannot. So, eventually it's going to catch up and they're going to get voted out. And then in 2 years from now, we'll be here talking about what dicks the Democrats are and what tyrants they are, because they're going to be implementing their own form of let's take care of the special interest and pump up the government.
well, because let's face it, all of the things that Trump is doing right now, his economic nationalism, these tariffs that are tanking the economy and ruining long-term business propositions, are going to be blamed on capitalism. This is what capitalism does, according to the people who are defining capitalism out there in the popular culture. It's an instrument of the government in the interests of the property and the wealthy class, because the wealthy class is going to fly above these kinds of things. We're not. We're gonna be hit by these things really hard in the face. Trump isn't going to experience what these price increases are going to do, but the person in a fixed income in Pennsylvania really is. And this is a real concern that we have now. The representatives of classical liberalism at one time, Republicans, a Republican administration, now claiming to redefine the American dream, which I think, yes, it's a dream of freedom and a dream of prosperity, but more than anything, it's the capacity to achieve your potential. To me, that's what it is. That's something you find in no other country in the world, really. You really are locked into classes. Whatever class you're born into, you can be locked into that class permanently based on the socioeconomic nature of the culture that you live in. America is one of the few places where you have the capacity to realize your potential. And part of the ability to realize that potential is access to goods and services, not given to you in the sense that the statists want to do it, but by exchange, by competition, which lowers prices and makes them accessible to you, through innovation, which makes them accessible to you. When I think of the great progress in industry, I think of how much a computer costs in 1950, and that a massive multinational corporation was the only thing that could afford a computer.
What
And
were
it
you,
took,
about 17
I
back
was
then?
about, no, I was 102. I was 102. Yeah. No, I look good for my age. So when I think that a computer, a sophisticated computer, took up 3 floors of a major building and cost millions upon millions of dollars, and that I now have more power in this little thing that costs me only 200 because I exchange it at AT&T. I get a deal, right? So it only costs, it's $1,400. It costs me $200. I have more knowledge in the palm of my hand than a multimillionaire could have in the 1950s. That's massive progress that people don't
Sure.
seem to see. That's making a product accessible to me, and that's only done through competitive pricing, and that's only done through allowing nations that can do things better than us at a cheaper price than us to exchange with us. That makes us richer. I don't know how much how often we have to say that free trade makes us richer. I got a stat from some cat trying to tell us how great the Chinese economy was, which, folks, it isn't. But he was comparing Chinese manufacturing, which is something like 4.2 trillion in manufacturing, to American manufacturing, which is something like 2 point something trillion. And I said, you realize your stupid statistic is absolutely irrelevant, right? And he, of course, doesn't understand it because he's a communist. It's like outsourcing manufacturing to other people. It has made us richer. It's because we're actually too rich to do that stuff. You're capital poor. You have capital in people, and so you can now do these jobs that we are now too rich to do. And of course, it makes you look like, oh, you're a manufacturing king. But it doesn't mean you're richer than us. You're not richer than us. Your economy isn't better than ours, despite all the interference of the political class. We're still the richest, most innovative economy on Earth, and this is despite this kind of interference and stupidity. So we have to get people out of the mindset that bringing back this manufacturing infrastructure is somehow going to also lead to prosperity. Let's leave aside the fact that it's going to take years to build up this infrastructure that these entrepreneurs are saying they're now investing in the United States. And let's leave aside the fact it's going to take years to build up the agricultural infrastructure to make up for what we're going to keep out from Mexico. I mean, last I looked, 95% of the fruit I was getting at Whole Foods comes from Mexico. So how the starved Central Valley is going to do it when, you know, Gavin Newsom's water policies has made a perpetual drought in the breadbasket of California, I don't know. And how it's going to do it when they subsidize corn and other crops and subsidize farmers not to grow stuff. Good luck.
Well, Newsom, he seems to be in the process of like a personal reinvention to get himself for his presidential run. He's being very critical of the Dems. He's having Steve Bannon on his little podcast there. You know, I was just thinking about from 2008 to 2016, whenever Obama would speak, I would become enraged. The thing that he would say were just so ridiculous. I mean, it was socialism light. I don't like to throw that around and just accuse everybody I disagree with as socialism. But he certainly is a big government progressive. And the things that he would say, like, you didn't build that business you have, you didn't build that, things of that nature, used to really, get under my skin. And then, Bernie Sanders came along and fair trade. We got to have fair trade. I can't do his accent. I shouldn't even try. You're the actor. You have
to put the arm up in the air when you're doing. The arm has to come up and do all this. And every time he talks,
yes.
his arm.
Yes.
We need fair trade.
Yeah, but now the Republicans are talking the same way. But, there's been signs of this. In Alan Greenspan's book, The Age of Turbulence, he talks about how Jack Kemp, I think in the early 80s, maybe even late 70s, I'm not sure. But basically what Kemp said to him was, given the Laffer curve that says that when you cut taxes, you'll increase revenues, Kemp was saying, well, why shouldn't we be able to promise voters as well? I'm getting a signal here that your mic keeps messing up, Mark, so you got to maybe do some kind of adjustment.
How is it messing up?
I don't know. I didn't notice it. How is it messing it up, Eric? You got to tell us what's happening.
Am I too loud? Is it
I don't think you're too loud. I don't think you could be too loud. You have a very good voice. Like you could just boom through it. Like they could put it over a megaphone and just have you talking, maybe in different accents. But anyway, so Kemp was saying that, we could just cut taxes. We don't have to raise taxes. And when we cut taxes, it's going to increase revenue so we can promise people things. So Republicans have evidently been at this for a while. And even, Barry Goldwater in, The Conscience of a Conservative talked about treating labor laws as antitrust laws. So the signs of this, I suppose, have been there for quite some time, and probably why Ayn Rand, was adamant that she was not a conservative. And of course, her great essay says, conservatism and obituary. I recommend that to anybody out there, to everybody. So it says that your mic is getting soft and distorted. Greg says it was chattering, as in cutting out for a moment. And Alan Thomas says just keep going. He wants just keep rocking.
Oh, I think I had a bad connection there. I think I fixed it. Let me know if I fixed it.
What kind of mic are you working with?
A black one.
I'm not sure that's politically correct to say that.
This was a mic given to me by the Ayn Rand Institute when I did when I played John Galt in their read through.
Isn't that like 30 years ago? When was this?
30 years ago? No, my Lord, it was like 2 years ago. It was during COVID. It was during COVID because we would have done the performance live, but we had to do it via Zoom.
See, I got a Yeti Blue, and the thing, it works wonderfully.
It looks massive.
It's a large microphone. Size matters
That's
when,
what
it comes,
she says, yeah.
when it comes to the microphones. So I mean,
Wait, speaking of,
don't say speaking of size matters because I don't want to get into that.
No, I wasn't going there. But I wanted to go into this idea of the Laffer curve and cutting taxes and how it brings in more revenue. This is a true thing. It does bring in more revenue. However, what the Republicans do not combine tax cuts with are comparable cuts in spending. And so when you may be bringing in more revenue from cutting taxes, but if the spending continues to rise, you're deficit spending. And this is precisely what the Senate is trying to pull off on us right now.
Nice pivot.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to.
That was good.
The House has, in fact, created something that attempts to deal with the budget deficit by cutting spending within the government. The Senate is trying to punt the football down the road by bringing in massive tax cuts to the middle class, which sounds great to everybody, but increasing spending at a normal rate, which means we will be increasing the deficit. The deficit will continue to grow, which is inflationary, which in the end, folks, this $37 trillion chicken has to come home to roost at some point. And I know that objectivists and Misesians have been saying that this debt is going to cause a massive crash at some point. Now, we have been wrong with respect to when, because every 10 years we say this is it. This is going to be the time when all the house of cards falls. It's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. We don't know when, but when it happens, it's likely to be catastrophic, particularly with the amount of debt we've accumulated up to this point. If you think about it, Michael, it took us from the founding of the Republic to the 1980s to build up $1 trillion in debt. And from the 1980s to 2025, we've increased that by $36 trillion. That's exponential growth in debt. They're saying that by the year 2055, if I'm still alive at that point, I'm going to be an old man and not quite capable of handling the trauma that will come down to us if our GDP reaches 211%, if the debt reaches 211% of the GDP, which they predict by 2055, with the bill that the Senate wants to pass. 211% of the GDP, folks. Now think of that. That means the debt is outpacing everything we produce.
Insane.
Outpacing it by double, by 211%. That is insane, folks. That's insane. That's untenable. And but what has to be done about it is not making people happy, because Americans have contempt for the Constitution. They now think the state has a responsibility to take care of them on some level, and cutting those programs that now have become sort of endemic to our society and our social culture and our political culture and our understanding of what government is an anathema to these people. Yet there's no way around cutting this deficit, relieving our children of a economic catastrophe, relieving ourselves of the economic catastrophe, unless they start doing that right now, which the House seems to want to do and the Senate does not.
Well, the House isn't.
I gotta save my dog. I'll be back.
Oh no. Well, while Mark saves his dog, I just want to point out I don't believe the House actually wants to balance the budget. They just want to they want to do more cutting than what the Senate does, but
Yes.
they're not going to cut it to the point where it balances the budget.
Correct.
But, a big problem with this is, crash or no crash, is that the debt weighs down the economy because we have to pay interest on it. And the only way to pay interest on it is to either borrow more, leading to more interest payments, and eventually a raising of taxes. Money is now coming out of the economy and going toward paying of debt. I never had debt in my life until recently. I went into debt to go on vacation. And what I'm realizing that I didn't really grasp before is I keep paying the debt, but it's not going down very much because I keep having to pay interest on the debt. And at first I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Why isn't this going away? But that's with a very small amount. Now, when you get into, the numbers you're talking about, these are numbers nobody can comprehend, right? No one understands 37 trillion. That's just, it's gone.
Or the interest rate of $1 trillion, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, and that's money that just keeps coming out of the economy. It goes toward paying debt and not toward productive things. And no one is interested. And by no one, let me just say, there are some people, obviously, so no one is a bit maybe hyperbolic. But the truth of the matter is, the vast majority of politicians and citizens are uninterested in actually doing what it takes to cut the debt. They don't want to do without their student loans, as Alan Thomas points out, or Medicaid, or whatever. And until that dynamic changes, nothing's going to change. That's why there's some people within the objectivist movement that are very much into cultivating sort of a self-help dynamic, and I'm very much in favor of that, because until people learn the value of personal responsibility and look at it actually as a rewarding dynamic, or a rewarding characteristic rather, you're going to keep getting the same thing. People have to come to take responsibility for their own lives and just cherish that responsibility, cherish that freedom, and press forward regardless of whatever obstacles. Otherwise, we're just going to keep having this massive government burden, this albatross around our collective necks.
I agree with you. Independence is a virtue in objectivism, and it's a virtue for a reason. You want to talk about independence a little bit, what that means? I mean, epistemologically, what it means, physically, what it means, and how it ties into our conception of the government, the American Capitalist Party's conception of government.
Do I want to talk about it?
Yes, I do, because I do. Do you? Let me put this another way. Will you please talk about?
Sure. Okay. So, but I want to, because we're not, everybody that listens isn't an objectivist, right? So I don't want to take us too far in the weeds while I do it.
But do it in untechnical.
I'm going to do my best. Okay. So in objectivism, every virtue has two components: one intellectual, one existential, or one that takes place in thought and another that takes place in action, and it's an integration of the two. So independence in thought means that I draw my own conclusions. I do my own thinking. It doesn't mean that I can't learn from other people. It doesn't mean I have to become an expert in every area. For instance, I go to a mechanic, and some people would say, oh, but look, you're putting your faith in the mechanic. Well, some people might be, but if I'm smart and I use my mind, I would do some research. Okay, which mechanic has the good reputation? Who, do I have friends that go to this mechanic? What's his track record like, or her track record like? So then I'll go to that mechanic or doctor or whatever. I don't have to learn everything. I'm still being intellectually independent as long as I'm drawing my own conclusions based on the available evidence and not just taking things on faith or emotional whims or whatever. So I'm doing my own thinking. Independence in action means that it doesn't mean that I can never accept help from anybody. It doesn't mean that I don't trade with people or I don't. What it means is that I take the actions necessary to sustain my life. So if I'm going to get help from somebody, I'm in a position to help them in the future, that I'm giving value out to the world for what I get. So that if I sell my cup to Mark, I'm giving Mark value. That's what it's all about. It's being independent in your thought and your actions and providing value for what you get, whether you produce that yourself or get it from somebody else in terms of trade.
And so, how does a party like the American Capitalist Party promote a government that respects that independence? I would call it human sovereignty.
Well, I think the thing to do is we keep making the arguments. You have to. And I think there's books that we could be promoting. I mean, Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. I think if people were to read, let's just take three books that are fairly easy to read. Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, The Law by Frederick Bastiat, and Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal by Ayn Rand. If everybody would read those books, let's say you had 1,000 people read them, I would be willing to bet 400 of those would be converted.
I would
Right.
also say, yeah, in capitalism, she has the essays "Man's Rights and the Nature of Government" too,
Right.
right?
Yes.
So if just reading those essays alone, if you didn't want to work your way through Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, which is a fantastic series of essays, by the way, and you just wanted to read The Nature of Government and Man's Rights, that I think those two treaties in and of themselves, I mean, Bastiat is an amazing exponent of freedom and what the law means, and as well. And Hazlitt is a great colloquial version of a very complicated system, right? It's
Yeah,
capitalism.
I just wanted to point. Somebody in the chat said that they recommended Aaron Brooks' Free Market Revolution. And
Yeah, with
I,
Don Watkins. I think
yeah,
that's good.
yes. And let me tell you how great this is. Right, I read that book in prison. Thought it was fantastic. First time I ever came across the hockey stick graph. Right. I didn't really. I'm not going to say I learned anything new. I'm well versed in economics before I read it, but I thought it was a very good book. And it's been such a thrill for me. Right, not even 2.5 years out of prison. I've interviewed both Aaron Brook and Don Watkins on my podcast, right? So from reading them while in prison, I've read them both. I've read David Friedman, heard of Walter Block while I'm incarcerated. Now I've debated them both.
That's
it's
great.
yeah, it's other guys also I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's been such a phenomenal experience. Like like when I tell my buddy he's still in there, my buddy he's on my cup, and he just it's so surreal to actually be engaging in real life with the people. Harry Binswanger is another one that I've been able to interview. Peter Schwartz. It's like holy cow, man! Like I used to read these guys, and now I'm actually interacting with them. And one of the things, and I'm kind of off on a tangent here, but it's when you're going to college or you're going to school, you get a grade that tells you how well you're understanding the material. So as Brent and I are studying all this stuff while we're in prison, there's no feedback, right? We're entirely dependent on our own understanding of what we're reading and debating with each other about these ideas. But then getting out and engaging with Austrian economists. I've interviewed experts on Hayek, experts on Milton Friedman, and all of them have confirmed that Brent and I do indeed have an understanding of all the stuff we were reading, and it's been just an amazing experience.
Well, that is very rewarding. I think part of it is because all of those people whom you mentioned, those great authors, those great teachers, knew how to articulate complex concepts in a very simple and understandable way. Unlike somebody who's impenetrable, like a Foucault or a Marx. You read or Kant. You read them, and it's mind-boggling. It takes you hours to try to translate exactly what the person is being saying. It's obscurantism on purpose. No, philosophy's purpose is to make life comprehensible and understandable to you. It's to frame the world in such a way that you can navigate it. It's not to make the world so unbelievably complex and abstract that your mind is boggled and you're actually disarmed and unable to navigate your way through life. And that's where I think objectivism is such a great philosophy, because it didn't forget that philosophy has a practical purpose in man's life, and us applying objectivism to the political realm. I mean, Rand was quite a political animal. is exactly what needs to happen. Politics is integrated with everything else in our lives, folks. It's integrated with our ethics. It's integrated with our epistemology. It's an integrated whole. And I think, didn't you say Valiant says, isn't there an expression that James Valiant used about it's all one or something?
Oh, it's actually it's fun. There's a funny irony here, or an interesting coincidence. Alan Thomas says, "Have you ever tried Hegel?" And Opar, Leonard Peikoff, quotes Hegel as saying that the knowledge is one, and Jim says, "Yeah, the unity of knowledge."
The unity of
Yeah.
knowledge. Right. Well, Hegel should have taken his own advice. Anyway,
Have you ever tried to read Hegel?
yes.
Oh my God. When I came across Friedrich Hayek saying, I don't pretend to understand Hegel, and given that Friedrich Hayek actually could read it in the original German, I said, okay, this is just, I'm not gonna fully grasp this. I'll go by commentary. What else can I do?
Yeah. No, it's hard. Just like reading Kant is hard. It's hard in a way that working out and training your body is hard. Reading Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology is hard, but it's hard in a way that you feel constructive. You know you're building something. That's not entirely the case when you're reading these other philosophers. I actually feel an intent on the part of the philosopher to undo my capacity to reason. I actually feel that happening. So I can feel myself getting dumber reading these things as I attempt to translate what they're saying into some form of constructive thought. And I can feel myself getting smarter as I read somebody like Rand or Hayek, because they make principles very, very clear. And we need clear principles now. That's the only way out of this mess that we're in. And unfortunately, the American people had a choice between somebody who had, I don't even, she was a non-entity. You have between a non-entity and a man who didn't understand the concept of principles. A completely political animal with a malignant narcissist, and they chose the narcissist because they thought they mistook his narcissism for power and confidence, neither of which he has. And what we need is a principled stand. So, I mean, a principled stand. What would that look like with respect to dealing with the immediate problems that are confronting us right now with respect to the economy? We have high inflation right now. It's going to get higher now with tariffs. We have insular trade concepts dominating the political sphere, and the Federal Reserve, and we have spending running amok. How would we, as the Capitalist Party, deal with this stuff? And how could we hope to find a constituency given what we know we have to do in order to deal with this stuff?
Well, I'm an incrementalist. I'm not a deontologist who just says, okay, the initiation of force is bad, therefore all initiation of force in the economy and in government has to end immediately, and let's just deal with the results, right? If you, for instance, got rid of the Federal Reserve immediately and went back to a gold standard, you'd have massive deflation and a massive depression, right? I'm not interested in that. If you were to get rid of the entire welfare state, where all the people who are now dependent on it are just thrown on their collective asses off of welfare, you're going to have a nightmare on your hands. Similar with education. I mean, you can go down the line. So what I like to do is, and I'm not an expert, there's obviously there's areas of expertise that somebody has to play on everything, but an incremental approach where we just keep moving toward liberty. So instead of, you may not be able to go right to the gold standard, but you tighten up interest rates, right? You don't keep fueling the fire of inflation by just pumping money into the economy. You lower taxes, you cut spending, you phase out programs. And I think that if you do that, you'd have a much better approach. But again, I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm not a policy expert when it comes to that sort of thing. I know a lot about principles. I know what will work, but how to do it, you really need experts. But one thing I'm confident of is it will take an incremental approach, is that you can't just immediately go from 100 years of government dependence to pure laissez-faire overnight. I think that would be a very destructive thing, and I don't think that it's necessary.
I agree with you. It took us 120 years to get on this drug of the government. It's going to take quite a few years, at least a decade, perhaps a decade and a half, to get off the drug of government. But in that time, you have to start making cuts. From what I understand, given the nature of the debt and the interest rate, the minimum cuts that have to be made to every entitlement program across the board is somewhere in the nature of 15%. Now that's an incremental cut, and that's going to hit people who are dependent on those programs fairly hard, since they're living on the margins as it is. But we've gotten to the point where these kinds of decisions have to be made, and we understand that dependency has to be gotten over a period of time, but the period of time has to start now. I mean, this is literally, this window right now with Trump is the period of time at which we either fall down the rabbit hole or save ourselves from it. And there's nothing Trump is doing that's going to save us from falling down the rabbit hole at this moment, unless he's willing to do what he promised not to do, which is take entitlement down.
Yeah, and just for the record, Cackle and Kamala, or no, she's not the cackler. She's the
Yeah,
laugher. Hillary was the cackler.
Okay.
All right, but either way, none of them were good options either. So we you have to be clear about that, and that's why there's a need for a party like the American Capitalist Party, because we need to have an actual party of principle that's going to consistently put forth these ideas. And it doesn't mean that we have to be Puritans where this has to happen immediately. But what it does mean is we don't accept compromises and move us backwards away from the goal we're trying to get to. I'll take any compromise. And I believe this, who said this? I think Grover Norquist said it. I might be wrong, but he said, I'll take any compromise that increases the liberty of the American people. I'm all
there you
for
go.
it.
That's beautiful. I mean but that's in alignment with objectivism, which is you compromise on degrees of principles you already agree with. You don't compromise your principles. So we'll have degrees, we'll have different levels with respect to our principles, but we don't sacrifice our principles.
We have a question that I don't really understand. I hope that the person elaborates. It says, does the American Capitalist Party plan to intervene with the current and constant political battle of Dems versus Republicans? Is there hope for a new future, in your opinions? I think there's usually hope for a new future. I don't know what you mean by intervene. If by intervene you mean take sides, no. If what you mean is keep putting forth our arguments and try to get our candidates elected, then the answer is yes. But if I didn't think there was a hope, I wouldn't be doing this. I would just lay down in a ball and give up. It doesn't mean it isn't a tough battle, but anything in life worth having is a tough fight. You're always going to face obstacles. It's just a part of the way things go. And, you get hit hard sometimes and you keep going, you keep moving forward, and you keep laying out the best case you can make. And
I have no doubt that the duopoly will come after us hard if we actually get on the radar, which is how we plan to intervene. The libertarians are incapable of intervening, even though they get about 5 million votes in a cycle, in a electoral cycle for presidency. But they're incapable of really making a difference because they have no philosophical or ethical foundation. And so when you have no foundation, you fall and you crumble, and you can see part of that crumbling in their courting of now President Trump during the administration, and in several of their policies. You can see how they have no real principled approach to government. But us throwing our hat into the game and competing against the duopoly and fielding candidates who can articulate these ideas well, I think when the American people come into contact with these ideas in a straight up debate against the others, they win. We win. I have as much faith in the American people as Rand did. I see the election of Trump a little differently than most people do. I see it actually as a ray of hope. The American people were hoping for somebody to reverse the tide of leftist chaos, of leftist nihilism, and return us to something that was better. Unfortunately, we have to look backwards to pick up those principles and give them a bit of a renaissance, but we also have to be progressive and move forward and improve upon those principles. It's not all about making America the way it was in 1950. It's about picking up what was brought to us in 1776 and then improving upon those principles to move forward in the future and making us more consistent practitioners of those principles in governance and holding the government's feet to the fire. Making the Declaration the real spirit, the real soul of America, and making every person in the political class follow those principles and follow the Constitution to a T. Now, I know we have to beg off pretty soon, but I wanted to leave with a capitalist quote of the day.
Okay, we're going to stray from the capitalist thought of the day, and we're going to go to the capitalist quote.
Okay, no, it's capitalist thought. All right. It is a capitalist thought, but it is a quote. And you quoted Benjamin Franklin last time, right?
No,
you paraphrased Benjamin Franklin.
I did, but in order to get to my thought, we can't just outsource the capitalist thought of the day.
We can't.
No.
We can outsource our labor, but we can't outsource.
Listen, I want to say something real quick anyway before you get to it. Then you can cheat if you want. It's okay. I'm not going to call you on it. So the Supreme Court came down with a decision on this Trump's use of the Alien and Sedition Act. There's a lot of stuff in there that's complicated. I'm not an expert on it. It's jurisdictional stuff. They basically ruled that the plaintiffs in these cases have to file in the jurisdiction where they're gathered up, which is usually in Texas. And it says that their proper method of challenging is habeas corpus. I just want to say that there is good news, in my view, in the decision that's kind of being ignored. And that's that the court ruled, I believe 9-0, are entitled to due process to challenge the fact that the claim against them that they're gang members, that they are entitled to due process before being deported. And I think that is a good thing that's largely been missing from the analysis, not completely, but in large respects. All right.
Yes, Mark. Yes, folks. I have to say, unlike Douglas Murray, I don't think that non-citizens have different rights than citizens do. I think once you come under the umbrella of liberty and due process, those are afforded to every human being who's here. That's what our country is about. And as efficient as some of people on the right may think these deportations are, those gentlemen that have been men, human beings who have been deported are entitled to due process. It has to be proven in a court of law that they are who the government claims they are. We can't just allow the government to make an assertion and then enable them to take you off and whisk you off to a foreign country where you are now locked in a prison where you have absolutely no power whatsoever or control over your life. This is not the American way. This is un-American, and further reason to suspect the Trump administration's entire modus operandi. Be suspicious of the people in power, folks. That's the vigilance of liberty. That could be there's my own original thought.
I was going to say.
Okay. But I want to say this because I want to steal from P.J. O'Rourke because I actually like this. And not that I'm a huge fan of P.J. O'Rourke, but he says there are two rules of governance in a free society. Mind your own business and keep your hands to yourself. Now, I like that because imagine how much better the world would be if people just minded their own fucking business. Seriously.
Now that's a thought for today. Mind your own fucking business.
There you go. Clean your own house, okay? And the rest will follow. Don't worry about the other person's dirty house. Clean yours. Make your own bed. Don't worry about the other person's bed. Don't worry about what the other person's doing. Your life is yours, and you are responsible for it. So pick up after yourself.
That was great. And I want to not qualify it, but expand on it before we go. when Mark says mind your own business, to me, and I think to Mark, wherever any human is being deprived unjustly of their liberty, that's our business.
Indeed, indeed, that is a public business, right? The deprivation of liberty means the initiation of force. The initiation of force is a public business, all right? So let's not forget that. I think that's a very important point to end on.
All right, so take us out.
Well, folks, thank you for joining us with this episode of Capitalist Corner. You got to be with us tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. You got to join me and Michael here. We're going to have some interesting things to say, I think, about a whole other slew of topics. Do not forget to follow us on X, argue with us, talk with us, love us, hate us, whatever. Just follow us. And please, 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 if you value your brain and your soul, I want you to watch The Rational Egoist. It's one of the best podcasts out there, and he needs and deserves a massive following. That massive following is going to propel this message to the world that needs to hear it. So we'll see you tomorrow. And always remember, folks, check your premises.